The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
It's live.
There, Wolves Wired podcast. We're back after a week away. Not a lot has happened with the Wolves since we last left you. Some coaches got let go.
Not a lot of real things.
Yeah.
A lot of Twitter has happened.
Twitter would lead you to believe that everything has happened. And just to be clear, we started a little late on this podcast because Dane and I got in a shouting match. I threw a laptop through a glass window. We apologize.
I think that proves that Tim is stronger than Tom Thibodeau is reported to be.
Yes. Wait, who did I say threw it? I said you threw it, right?
Who threw it?
I can't remember. I was in such a deep rage when it happened that I just can't remember.
I thought you threw it. I've seen the broken glass wall.
Sources say Dane or Tim threw a laptop. We don't. There was a shouting match.
We gave David and Tom an extended lunch as a result. Anyway,
how many people do you think know what we're referring to? Because this was kind of like
it went pretty viral on Twitter.
At least amongst the section of Twitter that
listens to this
podcast.
Anyway, that tweet was in regards to a rumor that had come out about the Wolves offseason, and instead of talking about that, we're going to talk about actual Wolves offseason topics. Dane wrote a thing at zonecoverage.com. The Wolves' 5 offseason pivots, kind of broke down pieces of the offseason that are going to make or break the Timberwolves for next year, more or less. And Dane, you want to talk about it a little bit?
I mean, I would just say, we're looking at an offseason here where one decision informs another decision, quite literally, you can't make the second decision if you don't take the path A on the first decision. I think the biggest one is operating above or below the luxury tax for this team. Really will determine how much money that they can spend on other free agents that they want to bring in. We know kind of historically that teams have been ducking the luxury tax like the plague. It's really, I mean, it has a really adverse effect on your. It's not only a check you have to pay, but kind of the long-term future of your squad.
Because that would be the question with it, as far as I've understood it. Part of why they don't want to go into the tax this season is because then next season, when they seem likely to,
100% too,
they would be using the repeater tax, which is even more punishing.
Yeah, and I guess kind of some perspective on that is if you are in the repeater tax, meaning you were in the tax for consecutive seasons, and if it becomes more punitive the more dollars you're over the tax. And the Wolves are looking like, if they're going to stay competitive and keep the Butler, Towns, and Wiggins core together, I think those are two very likely things, that they want to keep that core together and also surround them with good players. We're talking about a team that's maybe $20 million over the luxury tax, and what that would look like is $88 million just in tax that the team would have to pay if it's the repeater. So I think that kind of informs us on the notion that they're going to really try and avoid paying the luxury tax this season, because they know it will be there next season. Just nobody's going out there and just throwing out $80 million to the luxury tax, which gets
you also, from a business standpoint, Glenn Taylor knows he's in a mid-market, right? And the teams that go above multiple seasons outside of Cleveland and their situation tends to be bigger markets, right?
Yeah, I would say bigger markets, or just teams who know that they are really in contention now. I mean, we have the Denver Nuggets are in a pretty tough spot. Again, kind of more of a middling to smaller market, and they haven't shown a playoff pedigree at all. While the Wolves have made the 8th seed, it's hard from a business perspective to say, hey, let's really go all in and not care about picking up another $80 million in tax, because we're going to go make so much of that back in our playoff run. They say that every playoff game draws a team $100 million.
It's probably the playoff run, and then if you have all your season ticket holders, which they don't.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
And so, again, just kind of looping back, is they just are really going to try and not make that happen. And they have a roster this season that is very close to it. With just 8 players, they're already at $110 million, and the luxury tax line is $123 million. So it's really going to take some finagling. Do you have something, David?
I was thinking like just historical examples of teams digging into the tax or not. I know that the Cavs within the last 2 or 3 years have had some pretty astronomical tax bills just to make the LeBron plus stuff rosters work.
Yeah.
Whereas the example of a team getting away from that is the very obvious one is the James Harden trade from Oklahoma City several years ago when the Oklahoma City saw this cap behemoth coming and made the decision to trade away James Harden, likely MVP of this season. And
which smallest team in the league.
Yeah.
Like it's an absurdly small market, yeah.
And then even just this season, we saw teams that they started out over the cap and found a way to duck the cap. Is kind of what they say, because it's not your total salary number isn't determined until the end of the season. So you saw like the Portland Trail Blazers, they just dumped Noah Vonleh's contract at the trade deadline for nothing, just so that they could get below that tax line. So for accounting purposes, there wouldn't be in the repeater tax going into the summer, which would have, a very similar adverse effect.
And it's the job that teams that sit below the salary floor can fulfill, which the Wolves did a couple of times in the years where they were really, really bad 2 or 3 years ago, and teams like the Brooklyn Nets, Phoenix Suns tend to be now, where they can have the flexibility to just eat a giant contract like
Gorgie Jang.
Well, the stereotypes throughout the league, the Luol Deng would be the biggest one. Joakim Noah would be another one. There is a common thread here.
Yeah.
What is that? What is that, David?
Former members of the Chicago Bulls, coached by Tom Thibodeau. Tom.
So then the way I'm kind of looking at it is Nemanja Bjelica and whatever his salary is going to be is going to determine if the Wolves are at above that luxury tax line or not. If they decide to keep him and he's getting upwards of like $8 million a year, the team's going to be in the tax, and it's already maybe a question to say, do we want to keep a 30-year-old at $8 million a year who has showed, amongst good things, some questionable decisions
and health,
and so I think that's probably the single biggest thing that will inform if this team is in the tax or not. They could again sign Bjelica and then find another way to duck the tax by trading Gorgie or trading Andrew Wiggins, we've met Teague, Gibson, stuff like that. But those are not as likely of propositions. So it's going to be important for this year, that luxury tax line, but it's also going to determine so much of the team's future and how, if they do go into the taxes here, it's going to really hurt the team in adding surrounding pieces going forward. When I think even for the optimists of us believe that the Wolves maybe are like a 52 win team next season, is it worth getting into the tax to get to 55 wins? Probably not, or
especially if you can't get to 60. Because
yes, exactly.
So 2 seasons from now. Yeah.
But again, if they do, all right, sorry,
no, it's all right.
If they do go, into luxury, into that luxury tax, that does show that aggression that Scott Layden and Tom Thibodeau were talking about at the press conference. That says, yeah, we do recognize that now is the time for this team.
I'm kind of jumping from one thing you wrote to another, but Dwayne Casey just got fired from Toronto, and you made the connection between the Raptors of now and the Bulls of the Tom Thibodeau era. And I think you can make some parallels to some older Hawks teams with Joe Johnson too. Like you can just go back a ways with teams in the East.
Paul George
teams. Yeah, the teams that. Yeah, exactly. The teams that couldn't get past LeBron, and the question of is good enough, and if so, for how long? If your core is Andrew Wiggins, Jimmy Butler, and Karl Anthony Towns, is that a title contender? A lot of it's going to be determined over whether or not Towns and Wiggins ever get to a point where they can really steer a team in that direction. But if not, you're going to be financially invested in those 3 guys, and that's kind of your ceiling.
Right, and maybe it is. Maybe that core is good enough if you insulate them with the right pieces and you find some player development in Andrew Wiggins, and we see Towns make strides next year too. So I mean,
Yeah.
really, if the Wolves do pursue the tax, it's Tom Thibodeau saying, yes, I think this group is good enough to take that next step and be one of the 5 best teams in the NBA. And I know that kind of sounds lofty right now, but it's possible.
I think that's probably what Glenn Taylor has to worry about is, do you become a really expensive version of the Clippers? And then immediately people are going to ask, with Detroit going away from the president-coach model, the Clippers going away from that, why do you have a coach-president? Why are you in the luxury tax? And why did you go on with a flawed team?
Well, I think the luxury tax and with it's so much about a trust and relationship with your general manager or your president of basketball operations and your owner to say, hey, this presented itself as a really good opportunity for us. We need you to remove the mandate of no luxury tax this season. And I don't know, but it seems pretty fair to speculate that things aren't all super rosy with Glenn Taylor and Tom Thibodeau. So that relationship is crucial that way.
What about
too.
this? What if they had won their first round playoff series? I know that's a little bit of a stretch, but do you think this is a different conversation, or do you think that it's prudent for the Wolves, no matter what, to stay out of luxury tax this season?
I think, oh man, that's a good question.
I mean, then they're really good.
If Jimmy Butler doesn't get hurt and they finish in the top 6 and they play someone that isn't Houston or Golden State and they win a first round series, I think eventually we'd step back and say this. I think we'd be asking the same questions that we're asking right now is, okay, they hit that 4th slot. That was awesome. How much better is this team really realistically going to get?
But if they beat Houston,
Houston, that's a whole nother story.
Well,
absolutely.
That's what Tom's saying. Is they're almost an unprecedented territory.
How about
very, very good.
How about something in the middle? Like, what if they had been the 3 or 4 seed and won their first round playoff?
As in, like, Butler doesn't get hurt and they kind of coast into the 3.
They beat Oklahoma City to make the playoffs, or they beat Portland to get into the second round.
I think basically to really go into the tax and really make a more all-in move this season, you need some sort of evidence that tells you we are good enough to compete this season. Mm-hmm. And I don't. For me, it wouldn't be
a win team, right?
Yeah. And so but I might think they're a lot better had they knocked off the Rockets, because I think very highly.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to
Rockets.
suggest that. I meant more if they had kind of held serve in one of those 3-4 slots.
I would still say no. I mean,
I agree with Dane 100% because we've said before on this podcast, and even in our preview for this season, how pivotal the offseason after next season is for the long-term future of this team, with Jimmy Butler's free agency, with both Andrew Wiggins and Karl-Anthony Towns' cap hits in full effect on their cap.
Yeah.
I think that it is so much more important to have the flexibility to go into the luxury tax without the super penalty of the repeater tax on that summer, and therefore to be somewhat conservative this summer with spending, with tax, with all of the above, as much as they can be.
And even if they had finished in that 3 slot and won in the first round, I think there was always this underlying, or maybe not even underlying, I think it was pretty obvious, reality that the top 2 teams in the West were much better than that 3 through 11 pool, and I'm not sure that anyone would leave, even with them winning a first-round series, thinking that going into the luxury tax would have put them in there, barring something unforeseen.
Yeah. The flexibility that they need to have in that offseason, in addition to the fact that you have, I believe, both Jeff Teague and Taj Gibson's contracts entering the last year in that offseason, making
Taj will be done.
Taj will be done, and Teague's entering the last year of his, I think.
With the player option, what that he'll take.
So then Teague's contract becomes one that a team that would be interested in just the 1 year of cap hit and done could be interested in moving. The amount of flexibility that they'll have in that offseason, you want to have, it's like we saw with like all the teams that set up for LeBron in 2010 and all the teams that set up for LeBron in 2014-15 when he made the decision 2. You set yourself up with all of the cap space you can possibly make, including maybe being able to go into the tax. It's a position that for 2019 the Wolves could set themselves up to be in. So if they hamper themselves with going into the tax this season, making that bill potentially even more expensive, that doesn't seem like the wisest approach to that offseason, in my opinion.
The unfortunate wet blanket towards that pretty optimistic view of that. That's really their shot. That's the we've talked about 2 windows, right?
Yeah.
Forever. We've talked about this Teague and Gibson window that they put in right now, and then a future that definitely has Towns and Wiggins in it, and probably Butler.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about the door to that next window where we're like, okay, we lose $14 million of Taj Gibson, we lose maybe can get off $19 million of Jeff Teague. The thing is, that sounds great that you're losing $33 million, but you can't that doesn't mean there's $33 million in cap space.
Yeah.
Is what's the unfortunate reality of it is, because in the time since, Andrew Wiggins' contract has rocketed up to about $27 million, and Towns has been will be up to like 33 then.
Yep.
So we're talking about by next offseason, assuming that Towns and Butler have been re-signed for maxes, we're talking about $100 million
in 3 players.
In just 3 players, and a salary cap of like 108.
Yep.
So as nice as it will be to be like, okay, the Teague and Gibson era was good, they were helpful, they moved us to the second window, we're going to miss that production, I think.
Which is why it sets the table for the discussion around Andrew Wiggins.
Yeah.
Is it worth it? Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's not something I went into as much in this, and
He did talk about Gorgie a little bit more, though.
Yeah.
yeah, and I think those are questions of, can they try and find a way to get off of Gorgie Jang? Can they try and find a way to get off of Andrew Wiggins? I think specifically with Wiggins, and there's been a ton of air thrown out there of like, should they trade him? What could they get? The starting point is you need to operate. The Wolves should not make any deal unless a team views Andrew Wiggins as a positive asset. I mean, that's point one. The
100%.
Even if you are very low on the Andrew Wiggins scale, trading him and recognizing him as the Timberwolves as a negative asset would really you hurt the ceiling of what this team is.
It's not necessarily Andrew Wiggins is a negative asset to this team, and we want to trade him and get out of him. Mm-hmm. It would be from the perspective of, say, making him available and seeing what the offers on the market would be if Andrew Wiggins
and
was
hoping
made
that
available.
multiple teams are interested to the point where not a strong bidding war, but something remotely resembling a bidding war
to
happens.
the tune of a developing team or a team entering the first phase of a rebuild that might want to be like, okay, we want to set the table around you again. We think maybe with a different coaching staff and a different game plan, you can excel in this system, and we're willing to part with some of our assets to make that happen. Like to the tune of you. Ironically, you bring up the question of the Toronto Raptors, who we don't really know what they're going to do. It doesn't seem like they will completely blow it up.
But they did fire their coach.
But they did fire their coach after getting swept by LeBron again in a series in which they were favored in by a lot again.
Which to me is kind of delaying the inevitable if they just hire a new coach, but that's another story for another time.
It's another story, but it's one of those things that it's like if Toronto is entering a rebuild, the Canadian star is sitting right there.
Well,
Anthony Bennett is a free agent.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the guy. I think the other thing is Toronto's an example of they don't really have that transcendent player, right? They have a lot of really fun, good players, but Wiggins would be the gamble on the high upside.
Kyle Lowry teeters on transcendent player territory, and DeRozan was incredible
started in the All-Star game this year.
He was. He did fall off in the second half of the year a little bit, but Wiggins, if hypothetically Wiggins just joined this team, he'd be the third or fourth or fifth best player on the Raptors right now.
I think
probably.
he'd be like the seventh.
But I mean,
in
terms of
I'm
just talking strictly like talent.
You
and
really like
probably
Pascal Siakam, don't you?
I do,
dude. He's really good.
He's really good.
I really like Pascal Siakam.
I'm trying to think of the most
Jacob Pertl.
Yeah. Is Fred VanVleet a better player than Andrew Wiggins?
No, well, and that's the thing is what are we looking at? Are we looking at upside, or are we looking at
production?
Are we looking predicting the production for the next 10 years? And I would probably still take Andrew Wiggins, but it's not an unfair suggestion to say that both OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam will be more productive players in the NBA over the next 10 seasons. And I'm not even talking like advanced stats, adding up the win shares and stuff. I'm just, these players both of them present at least one discernible elite skill set. And with Wiggins, we're still operating under somewhat of a mirage that his elite skill set is offensive creation and scoring.
Yep.
And I think he could very well be as good of an offensive scorer as Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby will be as defenders. But we saw OG Anunoby be a very important defender in his rookie season, and Andrew Wiggins has 4 seasons of relatively ineffective.
And that's what it's going to come back to. Just not even talking about the Raptors is what are people really expecting for Wiggins from a fan scale to I think there's a wide range of what people are expecting in hypothetical Andrew Wiggins trade, where I think some people still view Wiggins as this prized commodity, contract aside, where they're expecting something good in return, and others are just throw a first rounder on him and get his awful contract out of here. So I guess the question is, one, how are Tibbs and Scott Layden, if they do decide to go through with at least making him available, how are they going to present him as an asset? And B, I mean, I don't think anyone in this room at least knows how the league views Andrew Wiggins, and GM by GM. That's going to be really intriguing.
I think the third thing you have to look at is there were reports, or maybe we know, that Tibbs thought about dealing Wiggins, not Levine, right? And Glenn Taylor stepped in and was like, don't do it. Now, I agree with that. I think Levine's fun. I think we all see him positively now, but he was injured at the time. I still don't think he has the upside, especially defensively, as Wiggins.
Yes.
And Taylor may look at it and say, look, I'm not convinced Tibbs is around after this season, right? Sure. Where Wiggins is contractually obligated to be, and that I don't want to get into a situation where I get 2 number 1 overall picks again, because that means you're really bad and that you've,
Unless Glenn Taylor had that conversation with Andrew Wiggins, you need to be committed. What if Glenn Taylor watched Andrew Wiggins this season and thought, well, he didn't do anything he said he was going to do?
Yeah.
That's a possibility.
Right.
He had his worst offensive season since his rookie year this year. I mean, I don't think it's entirely out of the realm of possibility that Glenn Taylor is disappointed in his output this year.
And Tim, the way you put it is, what is the way that the Timberwolves, meaning Glenn Taylor, Tibbs, and Scott Layden, how do they view Andrew Wiggins, and how does the rest of the league, how do those valuations compare?
Right.
The Wolves people versus General Manager X. How do those two match up? And I wouldn't be surprised if there is a team out there, or maybe multiple teams out there, that say this can be a player who's still 23 years old, clearly has the physicality that he's someone that we could shape. We know we'll have him for 5 years. We have him under contract for 5 years, and we will have time to turn him into the star. I think that team. I think that team is out there.
I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume that there's a GM out there that sees Wiggins as a misused toy, so to speak, a guy that's just never been used properly on a basketball floor by coaches and by GMs and stuff. Everything, like production aside and stats aside, he's still a physical specimen. He's an athletic freak, and he's improved defensively, and he looks like a really good basketball player when you watch him play. When you look at the stat and the end result, it's not a good thing. But if you look at him as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old prospect, an expensive one, albeit, I could totally see a GM thinking I can groom him into something.
Doesn't Boston look and go like, I don't see much difference between Tatum and Fultz? Philadelphia, here I'll trade. I don't think they could have assumed Tatum was that good or Fultz was going to be that bad, but they probably had some valuation where, like, I don't see a difference. I'm going to get some assets for that.
Right.
And I think it's smart teams that take advantage of a team. If the Wolves really don't value Wiggins, they'll be like, yeah, these guys, they put Wiggins in a system where he's the third or fourth option. He's not getting along with Tibbs. He needs a change of scenery, whatever. I think a team like that robs them, and then you go, oh my! Can you imagine another player going to Boston, another Ortiz, Moss, whatever? Wiggins would be that guy, right, along with KG.
Yeah. I think it's funny that you bring up Boston. This is kind of somewhat going in a different direction, but Jason Tatum, just watching him really closely,
he's freaking amazing.
But isn't a lot of his skill set very similar to Andrew Wiggins?
Sure.
His strongest change of direction move is a spin move.
That's a good point.
Right to left spin move, and that's also Andrew Wiggins. And it's in many ways those two players are very similar. And I know probably a lot of people who are worn down with Andrew Wiggins wouldn't like to hear that, because Jason Tatum is this.
He shot like 44% from three this year. That's the big distinction. But yeah,
I guess more so is like a utilization of those physical tools that you're talking about.
Right.
I think if you employed a European scout who who didn't follow the NBA but was very familiar with basketball players, they would see a lot of similarities in the upside of both Jason Tatum and Andrew Wiggins. So, yeah, I guess to kind of wrap that all, that's the starting point of any Andrew Wiggins sort of conversation is he a positive asset in the other team's eyes?
I mean, I'm going to throw another team. We've already talked about the Raptors, and that this narrative doesn't need any more fire, but I'll add to it. What if Ujiri does decide he wants to blow it up and sees Wiggins as just like a younger version of DeRozan? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Just throwing that out there. But
well, the other one, I think everyone's pipe dream is a Spurs deal. But I look at that, and the Spurs might go, I have a player that's injured, and it has to be a serious injury if he's telling him the team doctors are full of crap and I'm going to sit out, who was in New York when the team was playing in the playoffs, and is 28. I could see this.
He's 26.
He's
he
26.
just turned 26.
Okay. Either way, I mean, I think a team like that could go,
man, I'll put it.
Turn Wiggins into the star.
My only thing is, man, let's just say for a second that the Wolves had an opportunity to acquire Kyrie Irving and they passed on it. If they passed up on a deal to acquire Kawhi Leonard, I think people's brains would explode if those came out as facts ever.
Yeah.
I'll quit.
For Andrew Wiggins.
No, and I think Tibbs would love Kawhi Leonard, but there's a chance you get a guy that has a serious injury and Wiggins blows up.
As you do with Kyrie Irving, actually, to be fair.
And that's what I was going to go with. You didn't know this about Wiggins when the Kyrie deal was going on, right? You knew that he would be expensive. You didn't know he'd have a really inefficient season where he didn't take a step forward. Did you?
I think he did more than maybe I did. But I don't think either of us knew that Kyrie was going to be as huge on both ends of the floor for Boston as he ended up being, unless you thought he was going to be as good defensively as he was. But I don't know. There's two sides to it for Wiggins. On one hand, and this is something I wrote about a little bit, Wiggins regressed offensively. We've talked about that a bunch. He improved defensively. If he can ever put the pieces together offensively, then he could earn his max deal, because I think his defense, if the second half of the year's defense is his defense now, an efficient offensively Andrew Wiggins is a borderline max player, if not a max player, maybe a slight overpay. The question is, how the hell do you ever get to that point without just totally reforming his game? And maybe he's not willing to do that. So maybe trading him is the right move, not just for the Wolves, but for him. I don't know.
Totally. I just think, and having kind of dug through a couple of the other teams like salary cap sheets and specifically looking at Toronto, it's going to be very difficult to find. Even if you find that team, even if there's 5 teams that say, yeah, we do view Andrew Wiggins as a positive asset, we're willing to work, it's so hard to find a trade with one of those 5 teams that works. And so that's my operating assumption. And it's funny, I know we're going to talk about John Krasinski had a good mailbag that he had today, and I would say John's normally very conservative on as a journalist and speculating on things, but seemed to really leave the door open that an Andrew Wiggins trade is a possibility. And my personal understanding, and just having looked at a lot of the other possible trades, is I really think an Andrew Wiggins trade is very unlikely. I think I agree. It's very hard to finagle, and there's limited resources and ways in which to trade him. So that's my
even Kawhi.
assumption.
I don't think you can trade Kawhi for Wiggins straight up unless Kawhi signs something this summer, if I'm not mistaken. Because Kawhi's only making $18 million this summer. So they'd have to give another piece would have to be coming in.
Everyone looks at the ways these work out. Very few people go, I could be Cleveland trading for Isaiah Thomas. And I just think that's my warning for trading for injured players.
I hear that, but it's Kawhi.
I know. And I guess
it's for Wiggins.
I think I'm going against the grain mostly because I see people going one way. But
that's fair.
I have the one idea that I have come up with that I may be looking into for a different setting that you guys will find out about on Twitter later this week. The Brooklyn Nets. Jeremy Lin expires after next year. Damari Carroll expires after next year. For Wiggins.
Just a salary dump, essentially. Only get Carroll maybe as your fill-in starter.
Yeah, you get Carroll as a fill-in starter on the wing. My super pipe dream would then be to also try to trade Jeff Teague and start Tyus and have Lynn come off the bench as the point guard.
My question for you is, I can see how that might help.
The money works. That's the first step. Is I found something that the money works.
That's $27 million, and Wiggins will make $25.5. My thing is what does it look like? We talk about when the new window comes up next year. And the important window is window 2 of once Teague and Gibson are gone. We're inherently just saying, all right, it's just Towns and Butler then, and that's kind of good in the situation where Wiggins is a negative asset in that next window, but I think it's still worth holding on to the 10, 15, 20% possibility that Andrew Wiggins becomes something that is a positive impact player rather than just training for Jeremy Len and DeMario Carroll, who are going to be gone.
It's essentially trading for the open door in 2019 in free agency, which is a risk.
Well,
because it's like, say you want a third piece to go with Towns and Butler, right? What about
Derrick Rose? Just kidding. Go ahead.
Klay Thompson.
He just,
I know the reporting from San Francisco that he's probably going to re-sign with the Warriors. He is technically a free agent in 2019. A piece like that.
How do you sign him, David? Though there's going to be no space
without Wiggins' contract in 2019.
No, because you're still going to have Teague on. You're going to still have Teague on the books. You're going to still have Gorgie on the books.
I think he was suggesting you move.
I was suggesting you move Teague in this offseason if I pull the Wiggins deal off.
And then does Gorgie then
a full gutting? It's possible. I think it's going to be really, really hard.
Does Gorgie get dumped also with like that first round pick, the 20th pick somewhere? Because you got to dump him in order for that to work.
So the question with that is, then are these premier free agents? Do they want to come to Minnesota, and do they want to play for Tibbs?
Leave Golden State and Steve Kerr even more specifically.
That's just an example.
Right.
I want. Like it's literally like, get me someone who shoots 42%.
It gives you
from
options,
three.
if nothing else, right? I mean, that's the important thing. If you're able to gut everything,
The two sides of the coin are: it gives you the option to add a third piece that might fit better with Butler and Towns, who I would argue are the team's two best players comfortably. Yep. It gives you room to go find a third piece. The flip side of that coin is you're trading for the mystery box, because you have nothing like. In 2019, there is nothing guaranteed in Minnesota as a free agent destination. We've seen so many times in the past, it just doesn't work.
Right.
It's different because they have if they re-sign Butler immediately in 2019 and say, we have Butler and Towns, we have 2 All-Stars and an open slot for somebody to come in here and run the show with them. That is the most appetizing a Timberwolves team has ever looked in free agency, in my opinion.
And I mean, a couple things you have to think through. I think maybe post Tibbs, or again, if Tibbs can make this adjustment that very few people think he can, and be like just kind of a normal dude. Like
that's a total lifestyle change.
Although I will say this is needle in a haystack, but like he did. That's the wrong analogy, but he did go from like whack Tibbs, like just freaking out all the time, to like a little calmer this year, and maybe there's like he can.
You think so?
Yeah. He was
his
wacky.
vocal cords.
I swear.
Oh, you mean like on the sideline?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, there I'll agree with you.
He's not as whack as he was in the third.
I think Glenn Taylor reportedly told him to chill, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I don't think Glenn Taylor can handle that, dude.
He and his wife sit right
That's
there.
What I mean.
Must those seats. I would make those cheap if I were a Wolves season ticket holder. That'd be awful to sit there and listen to that. Can I do the conspiracy theorist in me?
Go
off of what you were saying, David. Yeah. There was an article in the Chicago Tribune interview of Jimmy Butler where he essentially said, this team doesn't want it the way that I do and the way that Tibbs does. So in that sense, it would lead me to believe that, one, Jimmy Butler respects Tibbs, and two, we all know that Tibbs loves Jimmy Butler. Does Tibbs love Jimmy Butler enough to gut everything to try to just totally start over and bring in new guys to try to keep him here and keep him happy?
Are you gutting it to sign Butler to the Supermax? Is that
you can do that regardless?
Yeah.
So either way,
gutting it to sign him to the Supermax and then have the flexibility to sign somebody else that's good.
So that my question there is, someone may view it as, why am I joining a team with Towns who may want out, right?
That's step 2, yeah.
Right? And then,
but he will be under at that point.
Oh, he'll be here regardless.
In year 1 of a 5-year deal. He's under contract. The Kyrie stuff where he forced his way out with 2 years left on his contract is very unheard of. So if someone's under contract, they're here. I mean, that should be the operating assumption.
Yeah, either way, like let's say Towns isn't 100% sold and Butler has an injury history. Does someone look at that and go, I'm joining a team with a 65-game player, right? Like that's what Butler plays, right? About 65 games a year.
Yeah.
And Towns, who maybe isn't completely sold on the program.
I think the scarier thing is the Tibbs factor and whether or not a guy who I think has pull with NBA players, Jamal Crawford, had any somewhat semblance of a negative experience.
Can I touch on this real quick, though? He has never played for the same coach twice. And maybe there's something about that we aren't thinking. Like, maybe he just doesn't want to play for the... Like,
it's not that he hasn't played for the same coach twice.
In a
he
row.
played for Doc for 4 straight years. He's played for 18 coaches because in a couple seasons he had like 2 or 3 different coaches.
Good point. I didn't think of that.
Can I just touch on David's thing quick? Because if we were sitting here and we each take over a team in the Northwest Division, we're playing like 2K.
Oh, that'd be sweet.
And we're trying to shape this team for the future. That's probably the strategy I would take if I was the general manager of that team. But it is a strategy that ignores the human element of all of this, and that's not always bad. We saw the Sixers do that, and look at where they are today. I mean,
as in
like the process.
like just Carter Williamson's Rookie of the Year. See ya.
We don't even.
Okay, yeah, I gotcha.
And a million different things. We don't care how many games we lose. It's about It's about the end game goal. And again, that's something I think I would do. I think it disregards a bit of reality in what's in what the situation is. I still think that a roster gutting type of play, it still can make sense while regarding reality. And for me, what I think that would be is taking it even a step further and maybe it's not this offseason, but next offseason, it's saying window 2 is going to be Towns.
Yep.
That is it. We know that is the one piece that is in window 2, and we will find our Klay Thompson. We will find Kawhi will be a free agent. There's a million guys
because that's part of it. The 2019 free agent class is absurd.
is absurd, and Karl Anthony Towns is going to be absurd in 2019.
He'll be very good.
And that could attract a player. That could attract a player of that pedigree, maybe multiple.
Yeah, I would say because it could be the thing of like in some pipe dream world where Lowry and DeRozan are both free agents, right? Mm-hmm. They see just Towns and cap space and be like, we can go there with that guy and ball out.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I mean, what would happen? I think a good comparison is what if New Orleans just had Anthony Davis really on their books and there wasn't, and there was no Boogie, Drew Holiday wasn't there, and it was like
I think the narrative though is that he's getting the hell out of New Orleans. I think that's what it would be.
He's just saying hypothetically though,
but
right?
he has multiple years left on his contract, and it's like what can we do? What can I do with the 2 years of Anthony Davis's 2 years of Anthony Davis's prime? He's perhaps the best big man of all time, skill set wise.
Sure.
And I mean that can be attractive, and Towns will probably be in a pretty somewhat similar place a year or 2 from now. So I think that's the big picture that's what the blow it up scenario that I would consider pursuing. It's incredibly complicated, and it was made so much more complicated by bringing in Jeff Teague, by bringing in Taj Gibson.
Yep.
I think the biggest change is that I feel like the Wolves had to overspend for, I know that Crawford turned it down, but for Crawford, for Teague, for Gibson, for just about anyone, because there was no guarantee that they'd even get to where they did this season, and there's a history of losing and all this stuff. Hopefully they get to a point where actually it flips, and people are like, you're talking about big free agents, right? That just guys who are pieces of the puzzle take a discount deal because they're like, I want to be with Towns. I see where this team's going. Let's say next year they go to 51 wins. Well, they're not that far out from now contending. I mean, you hope that, I'm saying best case scenario, but I feel like those deals strapped them a little bit because there's no way, like if they had a history of winning here, that they'd give Teague a 3-year deal. I don't think.
No, well,
I think they overpaid
it was
for him.
more of a win now. I mean, it was a more win now move, and there's a pretty strong argument to be said that the best long-term strategy for this team was to roll it out again with Andrew Wiggins and Karl Towns and more players that are in their window to go with them. That's all. That's impossible speculation now because it happened. And last offseason happened, and they weren't necessarily terrible moves. I mean, I think Jeff Teague is pretty close to fine at $19 million a year. Like, it's okay.
I think it's more that it's 2, not 3. Maybe
then I think that's what probably convinced him to come. rather.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, though, is
then,
hopefully you turn the tables and you're like,
Yeah.
players want to be here, they'll sign for less term or less money because of that.
And maybe if Minnesota's a more tenable destination, they have a little more leverage to say, no, we're doing 2 years, or that third year is going to be a team option.
You want
not a player
people
option.
like Jamal Crawford who are like, I could have gone to Golden State or Cleveland, but I want to be with this new team.
Or like a Kyle Korver, or like these guys that are around the league that are good veteran guys that could sign for anybody they want to for a veteran minimum and just be like, I'm going to come here and help your team.
Yep. And I think that's still the goal down the road. And I think that kind of segues back into what we're talking about, which is this offseason. And there are acquisitions to be made this offseason. We touched on Nemanja Bjelica a little bit, and how much he's signed for could determine whether or not this team has the mid-level exception to use. But let's operate under a safe assumption, I believe, that they can bring back Bjelica and still have the mid-level exception. The question then becomes Derrick Rose or a free agent X. And what is so unique about this offseason, given the fact that everyone is so pinched that there's only like 5 teams with cap space right now, maybe that'll get to 10 after some trades and stuff happen, is really good players like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Tyreek Evans, Marcus Smart,
Avery Bradley,
Mute, Avery Bradley, Danny Green. Those players could all be had for the mid-level exception. I really think every one of them will be held under that $8.6 million threshold for the mid-level exception. So for the Wolves, that's kind of the Derrick Rose. If Derrick Rose is going to get some of the mid-level exception, if he doesn't agree to be the Kyle Korver you were just talking about, David, and accept the minimum.
Of players like in the league with the current Wolves, he'd be the one you'd be like, I mean, that's the one chance they have right now in this offseason.
So you think he's going to take the minimum, or you think he's going to?
I think he's going to take the minimum because he played better under Tibbs, and it's a winning team.
I think so too, but how do we know?
That's the thing. Like, it operates under the assumption that Tibbs isn't going to offer him more than a minimum, just out of some weird version of loyalty or something like that. I could see it happening where, in Tibbs's mind, Derrick Rose earned more than just the minimum. He played his way into a contract next season, and is the guy. All those guys we were just talking about. Derrick Rose, in a way, if they're keeping Tyus Jones going into next year, Derrick Rose kind of plays the role that I think a lot of those guys, especially guys like Marcus Smart or Avery Bradley, would hypothetically play on this team. If Tyus Jones were to go, which John Krasinski in The Athletic in a mailbag mentioned at least as a possibility, that changes things, because then Derrick Rose is your backup point guard, which, again, it brings back whether or not Derrick Rose is signing for the mid-level exception or if he's signing for the minimum. If he's signing for the minimum,
there's a middle
options are then open. Yeah.
And that's what gets tricky too. What I think maybe Tibbs will do is say, because you're allowed to split the mid-level exception.
Right.
So maybe he'll say, out of that $8.6 million, he'll say, all right, well, let's give Rose $4.3 million of it, and then maybe we can't get Danny Green, but we'll get a lesser type of player,
Darius Miller or something.
Something like that. And which I don't personally agree with that. I think the value is in let's get one really good guy with the mid-level exception rather than kind of like splitting the baby with Derrick Rose.
One guy to make us have a useful rotation of 8 players.
Yeah.
All of whom should be on the floor.
Which is that's
what a concept.
That's crucial. I don't know. It's going to be fascinating though. Because if they do take this mid-level, because we're like, yeah, man, give Danny. Well, who did you just say? You said Avery Bradley, Tim?
That's my boy.
So let's say they get Avery Bradley and they sign him for like 4 years, $38 million. That's like the max you can give for the mid-level exception. What sucks is that probably boosts them up into the luxury tax unless they make another cost-cutting trade.
They'd have to
of
dump
Andrew Wiggins or Gorgie Jang, Gibson, Teague. So it's tricky. I think objective number one needs to be missing the luxury tax, even if that means passing up on Avery Bradley and using the entirety.
That would be a bummer, but it is intriguing.
Or potentially letting Nemanja Bjelica walk on it if he gets an offer sheet.
And that could be the decision: is Bjelica or mid-level exception player X.
Yeah, it would. I'm just really intrigued to see. Let's say hypothetically, Derrick Rose signs for the minimum. They trade Tyus Jones for, I don't know, a future first rounder, and they sign one of the guys that you mentioned as the backup wing. the Timberwolves defense with Jamal Crawford was so pitifully bad this past season and passably good with him off the floor this season. There's a scenario where that small of a move makes a huge difference, especially if it's a Marcus Smart.
And adding Marcus
moving
Smart.
from Jamal Crawford to Marcus Smart or Avery Bradley or even KCP, that could be a huge switch in just the defensive part of it. And I'm not saying
good,
that.
How good do we think? I'm with you. I think it could.
I think it could. If the stats bear out in the next year, it could make them a top 20 defense. I think that's conservative. I mean, the stats say a top 15 defense.
Right.
If it's Marcus Smart or Avery Bradley, who are noted like really staunch defenders, almost elite level defenders, it could make a huge difference, especially on a night when Andrew Wiggins isn't playing well. If you throw Avery Bradley out there into the corner, a guy that actually can make the corner three, and then is a better defender than Andrew Wiggins, it's endless possibilities.
No, I think that's really interesting. And then it presents another question: is how valuable is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Which
exactly.
I mean, it's I'm not saying it's not valuable, but if there are the Wolves going from being the 25th best defense in the league, which they were this year, something along those lines, to the 15th, they're like, nice, that's strides. Tibbs is making this defense better, but how impactful is it?
Totally.
When we're again with the long term, what is the end goal of they need to be even better than the 15th best defense.
Right. That was what D'Antoni kept saying in the first round, right? Because like 2 years ago, the Rockets were like the 12th, 15th. Were they exactly 15th? Mm-hmm. This past year, at least in the second half post All-Star break, they were first, I think, in defensive rating or second or something crazy like that.
And I think finished at like fifth or sixth.
They were sixth overall in defensive rating, and now they're considered, because of that, I think, considered a team that can actually beat the Warriors. Before, they were a team that would maybe get to the conference finals and lose, but that's the difference. That's the thing we've been talking about this whole pod and this whole season is if you really want to get to that point, you can't just improve to 15th or 16th defensively. You'll still be in that 3 through 11.
You'll be exploited. We live in a league when if you want to be an elite contender, your weaknesses are attacked, particularly in the playoffs.
Has Tibbs ever mentioned that before?
You gotta.
Has he? I'm just curious about that.
Well, it's that thing of I know there's a stat for this. I have not looked this up, but the teams to get to the NBA Finals, no team has done it without being top 10 in both offense and defense since probably a LeBron team.
Yeah,
like the 2009 Cavs or something. Like you have to be elite at least to some degree at both aspects to be that successful in the playoffs.
Okay, this isn't to argue. I'm just this team popped into my head because their best player is not a good defensive player. That Mavericks team that won the title, I know they had Tyson Chandler, so they were probably really good defensively.
I think I've actually looked this up before. I think they were 13th in defense.
Okay, I was just curious. That team was kind of a surprise team, but
yeah, totally.
It's almost
it's
always
the most probably the most surprising team to win the NBA title in the
since the Pistons probably. That team was but that team was the
defensive team.
That team had like a 96 defensive rating, although albeit in an era of
eighth offense, eighth defense.
There we go, still top 10.
Yeah. But that's again what the Wolves are going to be building towards is being a team that isn't the juggernaut of the league. I don't think they have enough talent. They're going to be a team that surprises you if they ever win a championship.
I guess the only X factor there is if Wiggins maxes out. You would think with two guys like a Townsend Wiggins, you'd have enough talent.
I mean, okay, at this point though, like what is even Andrew Wiggins' ceiling?
That's a fantastic question.
Like it's not even
like
right?
That was the basis of what I wrote about. Is Towns' floor at worst right now is 24 and 12 in elite shooting. He's an all-star regardless. Like Towns' ceiling is like Anthony Davis probably, or maybe just below because I don't think he'll ever get there defensively. Sure. But his Andrew Wiggins' floor right now is overpaid, inefficient. Just chucker. I mean, like an overpaid J.R. Smith kind of.
His floor is being the most overpaid
player in the league in
NBA history.
Sure.
I mean, given the dollar value of this contract.
His ceiling is surefire all-star, right?
I think so. It's just a matter, again, there is an avenue to which he can get to a point where he is an efficient offensive player in theory. Because the shots he like 30% of the shots he takes are contested mid-range jumpers. If you right, that's what I'm saying. Okay. In theory, if you eliminate that and have him either not take those shots or every time he's about to take that shot, dish it or drive to the hoop, in theory, then he becomes more efficient. But what does that make his ceiling if he's never a good enough shooter or scorer in the paint to become an elite scorer? And he's never going to be an elite playmaker. So again, what's his ceiling?
We're almost telling him to delete the one element of his game that if he got really good at would make him Kobe or DeMar DeRozan.
Exactly.
The thing that he does have is DeMar DeRozan is trash at defense.
Yes.
And Andrew Wiggins has such a higher defensive ceiling than put it in the future. If LeBron comes to the West in 2 years from now, the Wolves are matched up with the LeBron team in the playoffs. The Wolves it would likely be in their game plan to throw Andrew Wiggins on LeBron, guarding him at points, if not the majority of the series. DeMar DeRozan, that wasn't even a question in that Raptors-Cavs series. It was like, all right, they're going to have to find ways to cycle through Anunoby, Siakam, and CJ Miles to defending him. It's like they couldn't even. Their best wing player, DeMar DeRozan, wasn't even in the conversation for guarding the other team's best wing player, and that's just a weird place to be in the league now when we just have some players who are really great on one end of the floor and really crappy on the other.
Yeah. So, does that answer your question? I mean,
I will say this: the best thing that happened this season is that there's a lot of emotion around the Wolves where you couldn't care about them for years, right?
Yeah.
So you'd have to go back to maybe the Love, kind of the height of the Love Rubio.
But even then, right? It was kind of a. People were sort of.
I didn't realize
but
people passionately hate Tibbs. Wiggins drives them up the wall, right? They think that's normal. But I'm just saying the Wolves kind of returned to normal.
People on Twitter.
People I talk to though, like my friends who loved the Garnett era Wolves, all of a sudden are like kind of back to where they were then, I'd say.
On Twitter today, there was an article on Clutch Points or whatever that site's called, and it was headlined on Twitter as Wolves interested in re-signing Rose and trading Jones. And just Wolves Twitter. It's people I like a lot, but they're really passionate, and they're like, oh, God, I hate Tibbs. And I'm like, well, not to be a dick, but like read the article. He doesn't. It doesn't say that they're. All John says is it's possible that they're going to trade Tyus Jones. There's a scenario in which he gets traded.
Let me role play the Twitter patrol applying to that. I don't want to pay money to read your articles. That's on a site that makes me pay money for that. Yeah. All words should be free.
Yeah, but.
I didn't even hear what you just said. I just heard a loud noise.
Doesn't matter. It was not productive.
It's interesting that we have
the fan base is. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, that we just have a really big, and I would say that's an important part of the fan base. I mean,
yes,
there's so many
they're so
super invested, passionate fans that live on Twitter, that live in the comment section of Canis Hoopus, that are texting their buddies all the time about the Timberwolves, but still. That group is such a small part of the Timberwolves fan base. Mm-hmm. It's the most educated one, and also the most emotionally volatile. But
perhaps those two things are
shouts
related.
to Patrick Fenelon,
but several others.
Yeah. He's the one that always comes to mind. Sorry,
I wonder how important that is, though. Like how important
this brings back again. I keep bringing up this mailbag for some reason. Shouts to John Krasinski. He brought up the point that when Derrick Rose was acquired, Twitter almost melted over the signing and just all the character flaws that Derrick Rose had coming in or has coming in. When he entered the game for the first time in his first game with the Wolves at the Target Center, there was a standing ovation. If there isn't a bigger, clear gap between Timberwolves Twitter and I don't want to say Timberwolves fandom as a whole, but Timberwolves fandom otherwise, I think that's it.
So I think my point here is actually not that it's all negative emotion, that there's that people seem invested again. What needs to happen, kind of that next step for that specifically, is it's filled out every night. Every season ticket, they max out their season ticket holders. The people are
watching on TV more.
Yeah,
and I know
the ratings jumped, and I know they went from nothing.
Yeah, their ratings went way up this year.
But not only that, but it's talked about nationally, right? And there was discussion when they signed Rose. There has been discussion about Butler. I'm sure Wiggins has come up. Towns certainly.
Never mind. I was going to rip on national broadcasters for a second, but
I think the casual Minnesota Timberwolves fan I agree with what you're saying, Tom. Seems more invested and is following the team and is checking box
You even
scores.
see people wearing it, right?
Yeah.
Forever, the logo disappeared. Like, literally, you see the new logo now and stuff.
And I think that all exists, but that same fan in a different fan base, I think, watches more of the team. Like,
and
makes
that's
it
fair.
a point to say it's 7:00 on a
Are the
weekday
Wolves
night,
playing?
and and I don't think the team has gotten to that point yet where people are like are talking about it, but it has not become a part of their life in the way that we saw that happen with the Twins. We saw
You have to be
in the early
consistently
2000s.
good. It can't be, yeah.
And it became appointment viewing. Like, I'm going to eat my dinner and I'm going to sit down at 7:00 and I'm going to watch the Twins game. And I don't think, again, this is very generalizing, but I don't think the average Timberwolves fan has got that. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes.
I agree. And I think that my point is that's part of the next phase. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the playoffs as a whole for a minute. We talked about the Dwayne Casey firing, and I mean, we could go.
He gets a job immediately, right?
Yeah, he'll get a job immediately, and I think
Like
it's
a head coaching job?
Yeah.
I think he will.
It's hard. I mean,
I think I read a report that there's already a team that's coveting him, but I can't remember exactly what it was.
I mean, the Bucks, right? If they pass on Becky Hammond.
The comment that's been out is
Becky Hammond is is not
The front runner.
They've interviewed
yeah.
100 people, and
it's cool that they're interviewing her, but yeah, I don't think she's considered like
I don't
a
think it
favorite
would
for
be.
the job.
I don't think
Right,
if Dwayne
right.
Casey got it, it would be over Becky Hammond.
Well,
I think
no,
there's
right.
a
I
lot
said
of
that
other-
wrong.
Technically would.
the reporting on Casey since he got fired is that he immediately went into the conversation for every opening that was out there.
Who do you want more, Fizdale or Casey?
I mean, Dwayne Casey's a great guy, I think, and has did a lot in the way of changing the culture of that fan base. It's not like pejorative to say that he's a poor or below average in-game manager, tactical type of coach, and that doesn't mean he's not qualified to be one of the 30 coaches in the league, but I think you have to be a team that's looking for a coach that is trying to reset your culture and connect with
a
your
good
stars.
point.
And I think that's
He's done
different.
that twice. If he goes into an interview with a Bucks type team, he can go in and say, I went into Minnesota with this roster and got to 20-20, and then they let me go randomly.
Yeah.
I went to Toronto and I got more sample size, and look what happened.
Yeah.
I got the number 1 seed in my final year and won Coach of the Year. I think you can get it easily.
What about Orlando? Like, that's one I think needs a culture shift. And
Or, I mean,
that one needs good players
which
too.
coach-
Yeah.
I guess which coach needs a new coach and doesn't need a culture shift is kind of the thing.
well, I would say the Bucks. Like, I feel like the Bucks have to have some energy around them with Giannis and playoffs and all that.
it's also just like a crucial time to define what that culture is.
sure,
there too.
fair.
And
I
it's
also-
like with the Fizdale hiring with the Knicks, right? Because they're also trying to do that, but at the same time, I'm not sure they really know what their team is yet. Other than they have Kristaps Porzingis, and he's really good. Now, what do we do?
Yeah.
I swear, people in New York think it can happen.
I think we also have to mention that, like, I know that there's a general consensus that Greg Popovich is the best coach in the league, and I think there's a general consensus that when Kurt Rambis was here, it was a disaster and probably hilarious for non-Wolves fans to watch. But I think it's also really, really hard to truly have an informed opinion on a coach, just
Totally.
overall in general, especially going from one team to another.
Recency of Dwayne Casey and having watched. I don't. To answer your question, Tom, I feel like I can say a lot about what I think of Dwayne Casey. I could not give you like a good grade on David Fizdale because I don't remember even the last time I watched him coach or like.
What about the since we're on coaches, Brett Brown? Like, I feel like people really got on his ass after the Boston
I think people
series.
just get on people's ass when they lose.
Well, it's you know whose name I.
So you're not. I heard he was not tactical. That's I can't
Probably
evaluate that.
he's a coach that is stronger in culture than
And he had a super young team playing in their second playoff series. Like,
Yeah.
there are
Steven
things
saw Miami was like, just beat the hell out of this team.
So,
We can
like-
win the series.
like, because that's
Yeah.
the thing is, the name that hasn't come up in a lot of the discussion. Who's the other coach that got swept in a series this year? Terry Stotts.
Yeah.
Who
There was a brief rumor
mill, but it's gone. Like, and Stotts is one of those guys that he might fall on the other side of that spectrum where he's often been one of the names I've heard a lot of. He's got great ATO plays. He's got great sideline out of bounds plays. He designs stuff really well, and he coaches series really well. But maybe he's not so much of a culture guy in Portland.
The thing with Casey, I think, has always been if you're critiquing his coaching, he installs the culture that you're talking about. But when it gets to playing, and it's really singular, but it's important when you're in the Eastern Conference, when it gets to playing
James.
LeBron, he kind of gets stuck tactically and doesn't really shift or adjust.
Well,
and,
it's you look at
but it's also really hard to guard LeBron James.
Frank Vogel,
Yeah.
Tom Thibodeau, like they've all gotten the LeBroning.
Mike Woodson.
Well,
yeah.
I think those are coaches that if I were to be hiring them, including Tom Thibodeau and Dwayne Casey, they're the type of coach that they will wring out every last drop of what is of your team's sponge. They won't grow the sponge. Does that make sense?
So who
they will get everything out of that team though.
Okay. Frank Vogel also, where does he rank? Of available coaches, Casey Fizdale. Is he in that
I think pretty highly of Frank Vogel.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he gets another job head coaching.
Really?
I think
A lot of guys don't get jobs right away after they get fired.
again,
No, you're saying ever or next year?
Next year.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, he did
I
not.
don't think Dwayne Casey gets a job next year.
He did not like Vogel.
I thought you were saying forever.
No, if we're going to talk about Vogel didn't appear to do anything positive with a bad team in Orlando. That might not be his fault. That might be roster construction's fault. Definitely a part of that there. But there was no discernible change in that team's culture, mentality, anything. You don't know what you still don't know what you have in that team.
He should have some credit though for Indiana, right? Like a little bit of that in the bag.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, I think for Orlando in particular, that coaching that team was just a lost cause.
I think that something's wrong
man.
with their ownership or something.
That's like trust the process without the process. I mean,
no, they probably need to do that. Like they probably just need to look at what Philly did and be like,
that team is awful.
But then it's like you see the new hires that have been announced, right? You see Lloyd Pierce from the Sixers coaching staff to the Hawks. You see James Borrego from the Spurs coaching staff to the Hornets. These are guys who haven't had a head coaching job.
Coach Kucherov from
Oh,
the Jazz
right,
staff
yeah.
is-
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
So it's like those three, they're guys who haven't been head coaches in the NBA before. They're new, like sexy names of guys that have been like coming from coaching staffs that are highly reputable, that maybe now's their time to get a shot. Even like with the rumors around Hammond. She's been on the Spurs coaching staff for 4 years now, and has been like in that setting where you want to get a coach from. Both she and Borrego have deputized for Pop at various times, I believe, and Ettore Messina have all like done various things in that regard. So you like, rather than retreading on like Mark Jackson, Jeff Van Gundy, Stan Van Gundy, Vogel, guys like that have been around the league, and that it seems like in terms of new hires, the league is trending more towards let's try something new, let's get a new voice in
Which
here.
I kind of like to see. Yeah.
I do too. Like
It's just a little. It's risky.
Not great for Frank Vogel. And
Both work.
Dwayne Casey.
I mean, it's
both
about
can work.
sifting through the process,
and it's about the set. It's about the setting. It's about the team that you have. It's about what you want to achieve. Like Brett Brown, for what Philadelphia was 3 years ago, was the right coach.
It's the hardest thing to speculate on. I think
It's so difficult.
You're saying that too, Tom. It's like if somebody is a player is signed as a free agent for X amount of dollars, we can pretty well get an idea of if we think that is worth it or not worth it for that franchise.
Yep.
I don't know. Maybe like everyone loves Fizz right now, but that's not like a surefire like good move. Like we don't know.
I think the Bucks are an interesting spot because you have a star player. They've been in the playoffs. Like it just seems like this is a crucial decision for them. Where if Orlando messes this up in 2 years, you just hope you've banked some capital in terms of prospects and whatever.
Speaking of,
what I mean? Like it's two very different situations.
Speaking of Milwaukee, isn't Jason Kidd's coaching career sad? Like goes from retirement to immediately the head coach of the Nets, his old team where he had his glory years, and then he gets essentially dumped and goes to Milwaukee, and then
he leveraged his way out of there.
Yeah, he got.
I thought it was pretty mutual. Like I didn't think Brooklyn wanted him there.
He had like Milwaukee set up. Like
sure. I'm just suggesting. I phrased it poorly, but I'm pretty sure it was fairly mutual as well. Yeah. Regardless, I think you gave me the wrap it up finger soon. But do we want to talk about the conference finals really quickly?
Briefly.
Briefly? Okay.
I think let's do Rockets Cavs.
Yeah, I mean
Rockets Cavs. Sorry, Rockets.
Are
Warriors,
you making a prediction, Dave?
Well, okay, Rockets Warriors. The Celtics destroyed the Cavs Sunday afternoon. I said that right? The Celtics destroyed the Cavs. Yeah. Rockets Warriors has been the series I think everyone's been waiting for all season, essentially. If this were the WNBA, it would probably be the finals. They're the two best teams in the league. I think, Dane, you made the case for the Rockets. I think you're picking them, right?
I was. They were my pick before the playoffs started, and I think it's good.
Are you retracting?
Yeah,
okay.
I think
that's fair.
I've seen a ton from this Warriors team in the playoffs.
You also had to know how Curry came back. You assumed
Yes.
he'd be fine, but
I think we still don't totally know that. I think he appears to be more healthy than he was last time he played in the playoffs healthy. But I also think now that these two teams are there against each other, I think it's very close. But this Warriors team is here and not really messing around. And I thought there was a chance that they would get to the Western Conference Finals and limp there a little bit more than they did. And I actually think the Rockets, I know they've only played 10 games, and so meaning they only lost one game in each round. I've obviously watched all those Wolves games and watched all those Jazz games, and I have not been blown away by what I've seen from the Rockets in the playoffs, and they need to play 7 great games to win this series.
I've mentioned it before. I would love to see that Rockets Jazz series if the Jazz didn't lose 3 players to injury throughout the course of the series. Like, I would be very interested to see that series again. Like, my Raheem Rubio bias aside, the Jazz didn't have their starting point guard in the series. That's a problem.
Totally.
Like,
and he was good in the first round.
Yeah, he was very good in the first round. Like, I don't know. I'm kind of in the same boat. We talked about this right before the pod, but the teams didn't show very much of what they were going to do in the playoffs against each other in their matchups this year. And Golden State just seems to keep having new leaves to turn over and new lineups and play ideas and setups and targeting on the floor. Zach Lowe wrote a huge piece previewing the series earlier this week, which has all kinds of stuff related to this, and I trust what Steve Kerr has cooking with this team to find a way around whatever Mike D'Antoni can come up with.
And I know Kevin Durant said that they don't not care during the regular season when he was on the Bill Simmons podcast, but man, playoff Warriors is a real thing. Like, I'm not saying that they coast during the regular season, but this is another team. I don't think. I know this is pretty bare, and there's more nuance to it because it's basketball. But I really see a different level of drive in the starting lineup than I did the last 2 months of the regular season. In fairness, I think the same can be said for Houston.
I'm going to make the case for the Rockets, and this is after I said I think the Warriors
Just,
win, but I think it's close. I don't think this is like a known, like the Warriors are going to the finals.
They're your pick now.
Yeah. It's minus 190 in Vegas, which is like a 66% chance of happening. I think that's fair. I would agree with that. The case I'm going to make for this Rockets team is the players around the stars in this series. Okay, the Warriors have 4 stars. We know that, and the Rockets have 2. And if any of those stars crap the bed, that their team is losing. Their team is losing the series, in my opinion. And then but I think we should operate under the assumption that Chris Paul, James Harden, and the Warriors guys are all going to play great. I then believe far more in the insulating pieces in Houston than I do the insulating pieces in Golden State. And the Rockets particularly take away a lot of Golden State's options in the big guys. Half of Golden State's roster is like power forward centers that the Rockets can literally play off the floor in this series. Zaza Pachulia started in all 3 of those regular season games, and as much as everyone wants to crap on Zaza Pachulia, he's an important player in his physicality, and he is a very good screen setter. And without him, their pick and roll game is taken away. Also with Kevon Looney, David West, a lot of those other players on the margin, Nick Young, I think that this could really be the Warriors could be really underwhelming in the players outside of their stars that play.
Yeah.
Trevor Ariza is not. He's on the floor. He has a plus 18.6.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, per 100 possessions and minus 8 off, meaning he's in like 10 games. This is a ton of games, a pretty big sample size. His net rating is 26. I mean, he fits exactly what this team needs. 75 of his 76 shots have been layups or 3-pointers in the playoffs. He's making them at a high rate. PJ Tucker is leading the entire playoffs in 3-point field goal percentage. Luka Mbamute is the switchable player that any team to even compete with Golden State needs. They do have the insulating pieces around there. If Chris Paul and James Harden play at the level, the pick and roll and their isolation and lock up the way they did during the regular season, the Rockets could definitely win this series.
If the Clint Capella can't really be guarded by anybody inside on Golden State either. I mean, Draymond
like
Green is
a star.
Draymond Green is an outstanding interior defender, but if that pick and roll starts working and they get a couple lob dunks to Capella and they need to start collapsing more, Houston could open it up on any given night. That could happen in games 1 through 4. Like, I don't think that's an unrealistic possibility. I'm picking Golden State as well for every reason you just said about 2 stars versus 4. Even if the 2 stars and the supporting cast of Houston go off, it's possible that Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green can beat them by themselves. That's really what it comes down to. And man, but at the same time, oh man, I might
could argue that the Rockets system itself adds another star to them.
Yeah,
and then
totally.
And then you can argue that the Capella and all those other guys I just listed off are their 4th star.
Sure.
If we're just
sure.
On I think if you get everything out of them, it's 4-4.
I think that 66% number is fair. If I were to like place an odds, I think I'd make it a little bit lower though.
Yeah,
I think Houston could win this series. I wouldn't pick them. I'm picking Golden State. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Houston won this series.
Tom.
I'm going to go Houston in 7 just because it's...
Yeah, let's go.
That's what I want to see.
It's going to be... I mean, this is such a series where, like, if you're somebody who wants to, like, dig more into, like, trying to understand, like, X's and O's and coaching adjustments, this is such a fun series as, like, a test for that, to be, like, being really focused on, okay, what did the Rockets bring this game and what did they change for the next game? I think it's going to be like fascinatingly informative in that way.
Is it fair to say that of the 4 coaches remaining, Ty Lue just feels like he's hopelessly outclassed?
Yeah.
Like,
but LeBron's in the top.
Well, but
I like Ty Lue. He's grown on me this year.
Purely in terms of just like coaching adjustments, though, right? Because we've spent all this time talking about the Warriors and the Rockets and how they've been game planning and figuring out lineups and what to beat the other thing. And that's what Brad Stevens has made his entire name on this year, with arguably without 2 of the best players on his team. And the way they just completely blew the doors off Cleveland today, I don't think that series is anywhere near over. I will not believe LeBron James is out of the playoffs until he loses 4 games in a series.
So can I make an argument for Ty Lue real quick?
I got one too.
Before this game 1 happened, I mean, I understand how awful they looked defensively during the year and just kind of like a lost cause, and people were wondering if the LeBron in the finals era was over, and that was all warranted. But again, like we were talking about playoff Warriors, this is a totally different beast, but and I understand LeBron deserves a majority of the credit, maybe all the credit, and I think you can make that case. But does Ty Lue get any credit for the Cleveland Cavaliers suddenly figuring it out, sweeping the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, and like I think becoming more or less the favorite to get to the finals? Again, this is removing game 1 where they got
and he
smoked.
Doesn't have the depth of the other rosters.
Not
of
even
those.
close.
He also
those
seems
other
like a
coaches.
culture guy. Like at some point, he's figuring out how to deal with a lot of personality, a lot of pressure.
We're all still taking the Cavs to go to the finals, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, it's a
David?
possibility.
Oh, David.
That one is
David
minus-
almost
Go against
called
the grain.
Pacers. You almost called Pacers.
I had Pacers in 7 in that first round.
I picked
series.
Pacers in 7 as well, if I recall.
And I was mad about
Vegas is more bullish on the Cavs than they are the Warriors. Isn't that interesting?
Is there
like 75%?
that. Because the other team I've been crapping on the entire postseason in terms of predictions is the Celtics, because I don't know how they're still playing with these players.
Brad Stevens got 0 votes for Coach of the Year. I think that's kind of messed up.
I have one point, and I think it's interesting. So I just like the Vegas favorites and the teams that we are favoring are the road team in this playoffs, which meaning they will get 3 games at home to the other team's 4, and that matters. That's a whole obviously like if you bear it out, home court advantage is even more important in the postseason than it is during the regular season, and in Game 7 particularly so. That is a huge asset to have. I also think in both of these series, it gives you the opportunity to punch first. And I think that's what we saw with the Boston-Philadelphia series. They came out and won Game 1 against the Sixers by like 17, right?
Yep.
And that set the tone for that series, and they didn't look back. And maybe having this Game 1 opportunity where they just
put their foot on the throat.
And the Rockets have an opportunity to punch first, too, because they are going to be at home for the first 2 games. And I think that is growing on me in importance of having the first 2 games being as a value of home court advantage.
The counterpoint then is the home team losing Game 1 at home has not been a particularly good sign in this playoffs, other than the Pacers beating the Cavs in Cleveland in Game 1 of that series.
Yeah,
but LeBron James,
he's good. He's very
good. I am going to take the Celtics, but I don't feel good about it because
I don't think you can feel terribly good about picking either of those teams.
That's the thing is I haven't trusted the Celtics team at all, but Brad Stevens keeps wizarding.
We don't know who's going to go to the finals.
It's a Houston Celtics final.
Okay, sorry, I just cut you off.
Boston going to the finals would be very. Regardless of everything we thought about their offseason, about how they've rebuilt during the season, about where they were going into the playoffs, Boston going to the finals would be absurd.
It would be amazing. I would love it.
And it's something that seems realistically possible.
And if they get there, I think they would get waxed. But I don't.
Again, I feel like whoever wins the East it's just the winner of the team that's going to get smoked.
The true test of Brad Stevens' wizardry. Stop one of those 2 teams
without Gordon Hayward or Kyrie Irving.
Okay, and that's what I'm saying is. So say the Celtics go to the finals and they draw the Warriors. It's not a 0% chance that they win that series. It's not a 0%.
Boston?
No. Yeah.
I think it's a 0% chance that they win that series.
Nothing is actually 0%.
Well, sure.
So I'm just saying, just play with me here.
Yeah.
Say it's a 2% chance, and that happens. Maybe Steph busts his knee, or just things go crazy, and somehow the Celtics win the championship. Like, what the hell? They get Gordon Hayward and Kyrie Irving back next year, who are like.
But then the question, I was thinking about this, though. The question then becomes, I mean, you already have Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Are you really going to have a max contract guy on your bench? Or are you going to start him? Are you going to bench Jaylen Brown? Are you going to bench Jason Tatum? Are you going to bench Terry Rozier?
Must be
What's
nice.
going to happen?
Must be nice.
Champagne problems.
God, that sounds lovely.
Yeah, must be nice.
Turns out management is huge in developing a franchise.
Cool.
Wow, that was a nice way to shut the pod down.
That's a little backhand comment at Tom Thibodeau at the end there.
No, shout out to David Kahn.
Well, you didn't have to say that, Tim.
Just in case any of you didn't realize, Dane was ripping on Tom Thibodeau there.
I'm ripping on David Kahn. It goes back.
Oh, man. I went on a really long Al Jefferson Twitter rant the other day. Never mind.
I wore it.
Speaking of Danny Ainge.
I wore a t-shirt with Al Jefferson on it the other day.
The big Al Gray shirt? I have that shirt. I was at that game. Anyway, we should probably wrap it up. Our pod has gone long. Yeah. All right. Well, subscribe to Wolves Wired. Yeah, subscribe to Wolves Wired on iTunes. And then go to zonecoverage.com/subscribe and subscribe to Zone Coverage so you can read all the stuff that we're writing. So, in the meantime, for David Naylor at Prof Cedar, Tom Schreier at T Schreier 3, Dane Moore at Dane Moore NBA, I'm Tim Faklis at TIM FAKLIS. This has been another edition of Wolves Wired. We'll see you next time.